What's up, everybody? Axe Wizard here. Welcome back. Where we just left off, I just implemented a system, and I realized that I should zoom in on my code windows here, so you guys can actually see the code I'm typing. If I could, I would zoom in like everything Game Maker, but it only lets me do the text on the editor windows. So it is what it is. I could like revert my resolution down to like 1920 or whatever, but then it would bork everything else. So we're just gonna keep it how it is, and you should be able to see the code. I'll try to zoom in on parts that I'm interacting with. So where we left off, we just implemented this super basic attack system that lets me shoot a single fire, like a single weapon. But we need to be able to dynamically handle multiple weapons of different types and different numbers. So how are we going to handle that? This is going to get into some complex stuff here. So if you're like just getting new to Game Maker and you're kind of following along with this, maybe I'm going a bit fast. This is probably going to be pretty complex. So I'm going to try to break it down as much as I can, and hopefully someone gets something out of this. I'm not even sure if this is going to work. So this might be a longer video of me just doing trial and error. So typically, if we need to do an unknown number of things, we need to work with something called an array. So arrays arrays are basically a variable that can hold multiple variables. So you see here in their example, they have fruits and they have a bunch of different values here. So, but rather than using strings like text or numbers, I'm going to use something that's called a struct that I think that Game Maker added recently. So a struct, I hope they have it. If not, this is going to suck. Oh, they do. Thank God. A struct allows you to basically create like a lightweight, what's called a lightweight object. And it's not an object like object player ship here. But what I mean by object is that you can change its variables by referencing it with like a dot. So you can do like struct dot whatever. So what I can do here is that I can create, see, normally I work in a language called Go, and that allows me to define like types. So I can make a type weapon. So define our weapon type. And this is not a very Game Maker way of doing it, but what we can do here is I can go weapon. Normally I would do something like in Go, I would do type weapon is a struct, and I could define what it is, but that's not going to work here. We can't define static types. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do weapon, a local variable here, and in this object here, these brackets, I can basically make a bunch of fields. So what should a weapon have? A weapon should have its own attack timer, and when you're working in a struct, you assign with a colon rather than an equal sign. So I'm going to set this to 0 for now, and I'm going to do a comma after, because this is basically how you do it. If you've ever worked with like JSON, which is like JavaScript object notation, this is a similar pattern in how that works. It's very similar. So attack timer is going to be 0. So every weapon needs to have an attack timer, an attack timer max. I'm going to say 20 for this. So we've got that. But then we also need to figure out where it's going to be shooting from, because we can have weapons at different positions. And I can't just set that position once. That's something that has to be dynamically calculated. Because if my ship is here, and say like it's a bigger ship, maybe I have a cannon off to the side here. As I rotate my ship, this cannon needs to also change too. So the XY coordinates are always going to be changed. I'm going to have to calculate those inside the step event. So rather than storing just the XY values, I'm going to need to provide a way to calculate those. So I remember a function that GameMaker had. If we look in the help manual, calculations maybe? Angles and distance. Okay. So angles and distance. So there are a lot of calculations that GameMaker does out of the box here for us. So we can calculate a direction based on a point. We can also calculate the distance to a point, the distance to an object, the difference angle, and I think this is what we need here: length, dir, x, and y. So if we look at our little graphic here, can I zoom in on this? I can. So if we look at this little graphic here, we can see that this x origin and y origin, this would like be our spaceship. And say right here, this is where we want our cannon to be, right? So how do we calculate this new xy coordinate? Well, we do that using the direction and length, and then we can get our new xy coordinates based on that. So let me turn this back to 100%. So what we'll need to do is we need to have something called an offset. I'm going to set this as 0 for now. So let me comment what these are as I'm going. The timer counter for, I'm going to say like weapon cooldown. Oh my god, I can't type. The maximum to set the counter to when firing. And then the offset here, so if we look at this picture again, there's this length. This is basically the offset. So because we're offset from our x or our default XY origin here. So this is going to be the offset length. So this is going to be the offset length. So offset 0. So the length of the offset for this weapon. And we're also going to do another variable here inside this struct, and we're going to use the let's do offset len, and we'll do offset dir for direction. The direction of the offset for this weapon. So with this struct, we're sort of like defining our own weapon type. Now, since GameMaker doesn't let me do like a static type, I'll have to compensate for it by some commented code on how I plan on using this. But so we've got attack timer, we've got our offset. We also probably need to keep track of the weapons angle. So I'm just going to put angle, and I think we should be able to use that. And this is going to be the angle that the weapon is facing. Because one thing I also want to do is I also want to add turrets that can shoot in a certain sector of fire. So maybe I'll have like a 360 turret. Maybe I'll have a turret that's assigned on like the left wing that can only shoot, from, your 12 o'clock to like your 9 o'clock or something, So I'm going to add the angle that the weapon is currently facing. The angle that the weapon is currently aimed or facing. And I'm going to basically define whether it is fixed to where it's going to be shooting wherever you are, or if it's going to be an automated turret. So I'm going to make a variable called fixed. I'm going to set this to true. And we put a comma after it. Determines if the weapon is fixed to the ship, or not shop, ship, or a turret that can aim independently, which is a feature that I definitely do want to have. So we'll put that there. Variable interface once. So we've got fixed. Now, if it is able to aim independently, we also need it to be able to establish a sector of fire. Because, you know, if you have a really big ship and you have a turret over here on, like, say, the wing of a ship, it shouldn't be able to shoot across your ship to an enemy over here. You only really want to be able to shoot, like, up here. So we need to establish sector of fire. So we can do that with a minimum and a maximum for the direction. So we can do sector min. We'll do 0 here. The minimum sector min. The minimum angle of the sector of fire. We'll do sector max, not section, sector max. I'll also set this to 0 for now. The maximum angle of the sector of fire. So this is why comments are very important, because if I get too deep into making this, and then say I sleep on this project for a week and I come back, if I didn't have comments, I wouldn't have any idea what this stuff is for. I might vaguely remember, but I'm not going to be sure how I was going to be using that. So I think this sort of type here, this represents the data that we need to associate with a weapon. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just comment this all out. And what I'm going to do, I can't define a strict, a static type, but I can document how I expect this to look. So that's all I'm doing here. I'm going to move this comment from this line here to this here and just get rid of this. So now we've removed the need for these, but what we need to do is we've sort of logicked out what we want our weapon to be able to do, but now we need to have, I'm going to get rid of this, I'm going to say weapon variables. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a we also need to determine what type of weapon it is as well. If it's a primary or a secondary. I think for now I'm just going to keep this as primary weapons. So I'm going to name this P weapons for now, just P for primary weapons. And this is going to equal an array. Oops. And what we can do is that we can basically set our array. So we can copy and paste this. Put this in here. Indent it. And I'm going to get rid of the comments for this here, because you can just refer to the commented out section to see what those are. This will make the code a bit cleaner. Weapon variables. An array of weapons. Let's just do weapon array of primary weapons. You can see the comments below for what these values mean. There we go. So our ship is going to have 2 weapons on it, right? Because we we have 2 cannons on our ship here, and I'm going to change that in a later episode so that we can actually assign like sprites and stuff to this. So it'll be truly dynamic. So the attack timer that we have is 0. We were going to do 20. That's fine. We're going to do offset length. So if we look at our sprite here, I don't have a cool snazzy way of really calculating this. So if we just pop open our ship here and I go to edit image. So each of this grid is basically 16 by 16 grid. So the length here, I guess what are we going to use for this? Like a Pythagorean theorem to calculate the slope of a triangle? Because like this is our default XY here, and sort of like this is where we want to create it. So I'm thinking that our direction, we can create it here since so this is basically a 45 degree angle, right? So since 16 by 16, it's like a perfect square. This will be about like what, 20, 24, something like that. So it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared, right? That's what the thing was. So if we do 16 times 16, a squared plus b squared, so 256. So it's the same value, so plus 256. And so this is squared. So then what we do, like what? The square root of this? Where's that at? 15, god damn it. Google save me. What is the square root of 512? 22.6. Okay. So let's just round up and say 23. So I just basically calculated this length here by using the Pythagorean theorem, which I somehow remember from school. See, the math they teach you in school can be useful if you do game development. So this is going to be about 23, and the direction, since it starts at 0, this is going to be 45. And then for my other cannon, it's going to be, I think, 315, which is like 360 minus 45, or 270 plus 45. So that should work fine. So I think that's exactly what we need, at least for this sprite here. So we'll have to determine those like on a ship by ship basis, but we're going to tackle that when we get to that. So our offset length is going to be 23 because that's what we rounded up to. The direction is going to be 45. The angle, these are only going to come into play if it's not fixed. So I'm going to probably move this down, actually. And if we wanted to, we could probably leave these off. Because these are only useful if it's fixed. So let me actually modify this commented type down here to reflect it. Only used if fixed does not equal true. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste this in these comments here. There we go. So we got P weapons. So what we're going to do now is if we're not using these, I'm going to leave these off. And I'm going to copy this. And I'm going to add another weapon to our array here. And this is going to be 315 for the offset deer. Cool. So now what we're going to do is in the step event, we have to do a little bit of stuff here. So we no longer have p timer anymore. we are going to have to, since we have an array where we're storing our timers, we're going to have to iterate through our array and check the timers for every one of them. Now we do that with what's called a loop. So we're going to use what's called a for loop. So if we go to the documentation here and we look up for, and we just copy and just, there's nothing for for? What about loop? So this is drag and drop stuff. Where is my actual loop? Here we go, for. So a for loop follows this syntax, right? This has the assignment, which is where we're going to create a variable to keep track of what iteration we are on. The expression, which is where we're going to check to make sure that if we still need to actually execute this loop. And then we have an operation, which is what we do when the loop ends. So for one of their examples here, they have var I equals 0. I is just short for iteration. So I can't talk. So I is just short for iteration. It's just what iteration you are currently on in this loop. And then we have the expression here, which is just saying, hey, if I is less than 10, we still need to do stuff in this loop. And then once the loop is done, it will increment I by 1. And then so it'll basically keep doing whatever you have inside this for loop every time. It'll just keep doing it until the loop is done. So what this is going to allow us to do is this is going to allow us to iterate through every single one of our weapons and make sure that we are able to fire them. And if we are, we can shoot. So we're going to do that right now. So we're going to do a for loop. So for var I equals 0. I'm going to do a colon to specify our next part of the loop here. And we're going to say I is less than, and what we're going to do is we're going to use a function called array length, which will just return, how many indexes, like how long a array is. So if we look back at our array here, we have 2 objects. So our array length is 2. So we're going to say if less than array length, then we're going to say p weapons, because that's our primary weapons array. And then we're going to do I plus equals 1. Now in our array here, what we're going to do is that, remember, arrays are 0 indexed, so they start at 0. So this first index in this array is actually 0. This is so if we do p weapons 0, this is what it's going to be referencing here. If we do p weapons 1, it's going to be referencing the second index. So since we're starting at 0, we can just use this iteration here to pick what we're accessing. So what we can do here is determine if we need to do anything with our timer. So what we can do is that we can say if p weapons, and to access it, we just do brackets, like I guess those are brackets. Yeah, the square brackets immediately after it. And I'm going to say I. So the first iteration, I is 0, but next time it goes through, I is going to be 1. It's going to be accessing the next one. And since we're doing this dynamically by whatever the length of this array is, I can add as many weapons as I want in this array and do the same thing with it inside this for loop. So if p weapons dot, so since we're using since the array is just holding like these lightweight objects, these structs, I can access variables in them. I can say dot attack timer is greater than 0. Then what we can do is I can say p weapons I dot attack timer minus equals 1. So this is just the same logic that we had here for p timer, except we don't we don't have P timer anymore. So we're going to get rid of this. So we do. We do. Decrement it. There you go. So that's what we need to do for this right now. So this is how we're handling our attack timers. And so now what we're going to have to do here is that when we click to shoot, we're going to have to iterate through our weapons and make sure that we can shoot them. So we're going to do another for loop here. So for, and it's basically going to be the same damn thing here. So for, it's going to copy this. So what I'm going to say is, are we ready to shoot? So I'm going to move this here. I'm going to say iterate through all of our weapons and make sure we are, and see if we are ready to fire. Are we ready to shoot? So we're going to do if, again, programming is mostly just if statements, just your computer playing the what if game all day. If p weapons dot I, not dot I, but bracket I, dot attack timer equals, double equals 0, then what we can do is that we can basically copy this code and move this right here. And we're going to get rid of this. So now what we're going to have to do, let's see. We also need to calculate where we're going to make this. So see how we're doing this, our default XY here? We're not going to want to do that. So what I think I'm going to do is we're going to have to calculate that on the fly here. So we're going to see, calculate where to fire from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do var XX and YY, which are going to be like my calculated X and Y. And since I'm declaring var, again, it's only accessible within this code block here, and then GameMaker will clean it up after it's done. So I'm going to do var xxyy. I'm also going to do, since I'm declaring multiple variables, I'm just going to declare them all in one line, and then I'm going to do the calculations here. So xx is going to equal, we want to take our current x position, and we're going to add this length dir x function. And it requires the length and direction. So remember, since we're storing those here in offset length and offset direction, we're going to be accessing those within here. So how we're going to do that is we're going to do p weapon I for what current iteration we are currently on. And we're going to say offset length. And then the other argument is going to be offset dir. Offset direction. So now we just did the X. Now we need to calculate the Y. And we'll do that by doing YY equals Y plus length dir Y. And we do the same thing. And now we just calculate this Y. So we're using our new calculated values here. And I think that this should work. Unassigned variable p weapon. Oh, it's p weapons. P weapons. There we go. Save. Oh, and we also need to adjust this line of code here. So after we fired, we want to make sure we set our attack cooldown. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do P weapons I, because we're still within this loop, dot attack timer equals P weapons I attack timer max. Because again, every weapon could have a different cooldown. So we need to keep track of that dynamically by we store that here. So that's where we're checking that. So we can get rid of this line of code. So now we also need to so after we've created our projectile, the behavior of the projectile will differ depending on if our weapon is fixed or not. So again, fixed weapons will always shoot like where I'm going to be shooting from. A independent weapon will be shooting wherever it's going to be. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to say if P weapons I, oh gosh, I'm just messing it all up. P weapons I dot fixed. So since it's a Boolean, true or false, I can just say if this. It's the same as doing equals equals true. So if your Boolean is already true, I don't have to include that equals equals. And if I wanted to see if it was not true, what I could just do is I could, in front of it, I could just add a exclamation point. And that would say not true. So if fixed, then we can just do all this stuff here. And then what we're going to do else, since this is true or false, we can just say else. Now I'm just going to add a big old fatty to do here. To do handle independent firing weapons. So there, I can handle that in a different way when I go to cross that bridge. So why are these popping up? Unassigned. Oh, I still got P weapon. I need P weapons. There we go. Save. Okay. So that was a lot of code and a lot of explaining, and we haven't tested it yet. I think we're at a point now where we can finally test it. So let me save this and hit play, and we will see what happens. Okay, so it's not quite perfect. So you see how like it's all firing all derpy? So that means that something's wrong with our calculation here. Oh, I know what it is. We need to add whatever the offset direction is to our current image angle. So we'll do image angle plus, because that way it takes stock of what our relative direction already is. So now this should work. There we go. Cool. So now, just to show you why I did this, I'm going to add a bunch of dummy weapons here. So I'm going to say, I'm going to do remove these demonstration weapons. So now I'm going to add like 4 more weapons here, right? So I'm going to say offset length. Let's do, for the direction, I'm going to do 90, so it's going to be straight out from where we are to the left of the ship. I'm going to put this at 60. So this is going to shoot from basically the middle of nowhere on a ship. On my current ship, that is. I'm going to do 270, so it's going to be directly out to the right. And for here, for the other 2 weapons, I'm going to do 90. And I'm going to do 90 for the direction, and then we're going to do 90 for the offset here. And then 90, or 270 for the direction. So I just added 4 more weapons here. So this means that I should be able to shoot 6 times. There we go. Perfect. Look at that. So there, I just coded a system that dynamically handles weapons. And this will also handle weapons that do different types. So say, for example, these other 2 here, say these have a longer cooldown. I'm going to put it as something that's like an odd interval. So I'm going to do 50. And so these should fire at a different rate than all the other ones. There, see? So now all these weapons are dynamic and independent of each other. And I just made it so I can have a ship that will have, you know, tons of different weapons and stuff and be able to do all that stuff. So that was a bit of heavy lifting to do with the code, like right up front this early in the project, but I feel pretty good about it. I also need to add some more variables to this weapon array. So not every weapon is going to expire after a second. Some are going to be longer range. So I'm going to also have to store expire here as well. And I'm going to just put 60 for the default. But what I can do is that I'll put this here where it's supposed to go. I'm going to keep it consistent. So expire 60. I'll put this here as well, and I'll put this here as well. And then for these 2 other ones here that are going to be like bigger, I'll put you know, expire 120, so they shoot farther. So if I save that, and then now I'm also going to do projectile.expire, because we're declaring expire on the projectile, we're just defaulting it to 60. So whatever we set it as, it'll be overwritten with this. So expire equals, and then we can do p weapons I expire. So whatever value we have set in our array of weapons here. So now if we run this, you should, I'm going to fly over to the corner here, and I'm going to try to slow down. There you go. You can barely see me there. So now I'm going to shoot down here at this corner, and you should see some of them fly longer. Perfect. Awesome. I'm pretty happy with that. I think we got a good system in place for this, and that was a pretty big crash course into arrays, structs, and loops. So I hope you can see the power of what that is. Now, this is all super complicated at first. For me, this is like what I do every day, being a full stack web developer. So like this is, I'm working with this like all the time. So I sort of understand how this works, but I know that when I was first starting game development, arrays were a huge thing, and GameMaker didn't even have structs when I was really going hard learning game development. We had to do like 2D arrays, which were a lot worse. But I'm so glad they added structs. It makes everything so much easier. But so yeah, here let me just document the let's see, how many steps will a projectile fired from this weapon last. So there we go. I've got this documented. We're going to be adding more stuff to our weapon types. So for example, I'm going to also have to do logic on handling independent firing weapons. So maybe we might do that in the next episode. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'm so glad this works. Because this is going to be super embarrassing to go through all this and then have it not work, which is something I've done sometimes. So I'm sure we're going to get one of those in this series somewhere where I'm going to go all gung-ho programming some solution. It's going to suck and just not work at all. So, but thank you all so much for watching. And in the next episode, we're going to handle this to-do here for handling independent firing weapons. See you in the next episode.